Hello and welcome to the Make It Count podcast.
Hello.
My name is David.
And I'm Matt.
Hello. Yes, welcome along to another episode of the Make It Count
Full of
podcast.
vibe and energy today.
Yeah, we are vibing and energizing. So last episode we talked about the genre of fiction. In this episode we're going to talk about the genre of non-fiction. Anything to say?
Yes, it's nice to be mocked on the internet
Yes.
by your own brother. Yes. Anything to say? Only factual statements today.
Only factual, no stories, please.
Well, I suppose non-fiction.
just
You can
give me
have
the bullet
opinion
points.
as well. Actually, to be fair,
So, non-fiction being
not fictional.
not made up. Basically, I always found it a bit of a weird way to.
It is ironic because I'm sure there's plenty of non-fiction out there that is a bit made up, isn't it?
Oh yeah, someone's perspective. So one of the reasons I thought it'd be useful to talk about this is we talked about fiction last week. We talked about reading. Reading is quite a beneficial thing, but reading fiction and non-fiction are quite different. And probably most of the prolific readers I know are spending time reading fiction.
Only fiction.
Only fiction.
Yes.
And
I would
actually
agree with that.
there's a lot of real benefits for reading non-fiction as well.
For sure.
One of the books we've talked about, we've done episodes and series on this, is The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I've read that probably 10, 12 years ago. I've read it 2 or 3 times since. We've done episodes on it. So I'm quite familiar with it.
We'll link to those episodes below. We did a whole little series on it.
But because I've been engaged with it in some way or other for 10 years, I now expect other people
Yes.
to know this.
Yeah. It is in you such that you kind of go, yeah, everybody knows about this, right?
I've known this for so long that everybody else should know this. And even though it's one of the most sold and reputable non-fiction books, probably most people I know haven't even heard of it.
Yeah.
And probably definitely haven't read it.
Yeah.
And
Maybe if you go
they're
a generation up, people will have heard of it.
Yeah.
But our generation and below, people haven't even heard of it.
Yeah, there's a cultural, it didn't make that a cultural leap, but it's still really valuable. It has aged wonderfully because it's a principled based book.
Yeah.
Right. And so there is some rubbish non-fiction books out there. Lots of the self-help stuff has tried to emulate something of what was in this book, but missing some of the key points around character.
Yes.
You want to learn more about the book? Read the book. Secondarily, listen to our episodes on it.
Thirdly, listen to someone else's episodes about it.
Yeah, there's plenty of resources out there about it. And my thinking though is that in reading high quality non-fiction, whatever we define that by, we enrich our mind with good quality information. We help we talked about empathy in the last episode. Reading non-fiction can give you new perspectives, new insights into the world around you, and I think so many people miss that.
Yeah, absolutely.
You don't have to read a lot of non-fiction.
No.
If you just read one, as I'm coming into being a teacher, my goal next year is to read one teaching related book each term, so each 6 weeks.
Sure.
So 6 a year.
Yeah.
It's not a huge amount,
But that will get you
very doable.
So much valuable information synthesized from people that have gone through a rigorous process.
100%. And so I don't know how true this is, but I've heard said that if you read 5 books on a topic, so we're talking about non-fiction here, you probably know more than 95% or even greater than the world does on that subject.
Yeah. Almost, yeah, I don't want to say almost certainly, but that seems like a reasonable rubric, doesn't it? Because maybe if you just read 5 books that all say exactly the same thing, no. But if you read around a subject, even just a few books, you have got more insights than most people who have maybe read a couple of blog articles or something.
Yeah, and you probably get some of the benefits from reading non-fiction and fiction, the slowing down, the immersing yourself in it, but you're maybe extracting information out and thinking, how does that impact in my current situation? How do I need to change? How does that impact how I lead or I engage with people relationally and otherwise?
For sure.
So there's ultimately, what am I trying to say here? We have wisdom and knowledge of generations written in books,
Yes.
and people don't read it.
Yeah.
And so they miss out on the wisdom and the knowledge and the experience of people that have been there, done it.
Yeah.
You can buy one book from somebody and that's their life work. They've done that for 3 decades, for 30 years, and they've synthesized that information for you. It doesn't make you the equal of them, because they've done that for 30 years. But you have some real beautiful fruit there that you can learn from and synthesize from an expert for 8-10 quid.
Yeah. The amount
and
of
8 hours.
The quality and amount of information in a well done non-fiction book, obviously said there is plenty of rubbish out there, is so worth, even an expensive book is so worth it. I mean, we talked about this a little while ago. I can't remember whether it was on a podcast or not, but it was you mentioned you found something. Ironically, I think it was someone posting on Twitter or something, and they just talked about they were at the back of like a taxi ride with a bunch of friends, and it was a 7-seater, and they kind of looked up and they realised, man, everybody here is just scrolling on their phones, and they're just scrolling on social media, and everything they're reading has been generated within the last 24 hours. And so it's like we have such a short time frame, and we value up-to-date, current, new above old, tried, tested, rigorously torn apart and put back together ideas that have stood the test of time, and been communicated in ways that have been gone through. We talked about this already a couple of times this episode, this rigorous process. Anyone can put a blog post on the internet anytime. Nobody else has to even looked at it. And now in today's day and age with AI, I can just ask an AI to do it. And yeah, it might come out with some words that generally make sense, but it's like that AI doesn't understand what it's written. It's just looking at a load of database and going, what's the most likely next word? Mm-hmm. It doesn't understand. And we generate that because it's like speed and efficiency. And I was like, hang on, let's go slow. Let's tap into that deep well.
Yeah. And to that story you talked about, one of the things he mentions is that whilst they're staying abreast of all this new stuff, that's going to be irrelevant in the same amount of period it is now relevant.
Yes.
And so I can't remember what the name of it is, but they were talking about, sort of the idea of like quickly come, quickly go, where something that's been much slower but is there for a long time, it's going to be relevant and available and useful for much longer as well. And that's one of the reasons we talked about the Stephen Covey book, is that people still read it. I talked to someone in very recent time who said every year they read it or listen to that book, and they're in a position of leadership over many other people, and they're finding real valuable for that in their life and in how they manage and lead other people. So that is the benefit of non-fiction.
Yeah, for sure. And I suppose the only other thing that I've got in my mind when it comes to this non-fiction thing is, we talked last week about the idea of fiction, and it's great because we're story creatures, and that relationships cover into all of life, right? But we're so easy when it comes to work or career or any problems we're facing. We're so siloed. Mm-hmm. So I am working as an engineer. You're going to be now working as a teacher. Well, the benefit that you've got is you've already done 2 or 3 different jobs at different careers. So you've got a different lens than someone that just went straight from education into further education and then back into teaching. But even so, without all that extra reading you've done, you would have a much limited view. Whereas you've read, if I read some books about a different domain, they might have solved a problem that I'm facing, but it would never have come to me without actually dipping into their domain.
Yeah. And that's where creativity comes through, because you're able to pull different ideas together. And that's really nice. And ultimately, the biggest commitment of reading a non-fiction and a fiction book is not the cost of the book. Because like you said, £10, £15, that's like an hour of work or less for most people. And the biggest commitment is that a book's going to take you 6, 7, 8 hours to read, depending on your speed and how many words and things like that. So that time has to come from somewhere. And for many people, they are choosing to spend their time elsewhere.
Yes.
And whether it's all the usual places. Ultimately, the stats suggest quite a lot of us are happy spending 3 or 4 hours on TV, 2 or 3 hours on social media every day. And that's 5 hours. You could probably, you could read 2 non-fiction books a week that rate.
Yeah,
that's
easy.
That's 100 books a year.
Yeah,
you
can easy. Yeah,
and I'm not saying you should do that and you should never watch any TV or go on social media, but
that time is there. ultimately.
What are you feeding?
Yeah. And I suppose it goes to just that last question is ultimately, how's that going for you? You know, if you're listening to this podcast, there's an element of you're probably intentional in already. You're thinking about intentionally spending your time, but there are always ways that we can maybe go, oh, maybe this needs tuning up a little bit. Maybe I've slipped a little bit into that easy comfort. They spend a lot of time, all these platforms, they spend a lot of time and money making their thing as frictionless and as easy and as simple as possible. Ultimately, picking up a book and reading it, there's always going to be that element of I've got to make an effort to do it.
Yeah.
But I think the gift is you get the enjoyment through it and afterwards.
Yeah, I think when it comes to reading, the first 5 minutes after a noisy, busy day can be quite hard. You're trying to get into it. You have to reread a paragraph a couple of times because you're trying to bring your brain to focus on where you are. And going even into it, then you start to get the benefits. But ultimately, again, whether it's fiction or non-fiction, if you do that once, once, and then you don't read again for a month, you have to read it again.
Yeah.
And so there's hey, can I do a little bit every day?
Exactly.
And just then you're picking up the thread. And actually, sometimes the quicker you go through a book, the better, because you get the flow of it.
Yeah.
So
if you're new to this and you want to make a new habit, maybe the first one to read is something like Atomic Habits, where he talks about those small habits.
Or the 7 habits of highly effective people.
There you go.
There we are. It always comes back to habits, doesn't it?
It does. Life is a habit.
See you next week, guys.